Welcome, welcome. It's Tuesday and St. Patrick's Day. So happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. And it's Tuesday, and that means it's time for Heart and Mind with Dr. Dina McMillan. Yes, I'm Dr. Dina McMillan, and we have a potentially very emotional show today. We're talking about when compassion backfires. And we're talking, last week we talked about it on a smaller level. Today we're talking about it on a societal level. And we're seeing it especially with the issue of immigration. And the immigration debate is what we're covering today. So if you are watching on any platform, sign in and you can actually make comments and ask questions during the broadcast. We are on every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, whether or not there's daylight savings, which is confusing to me. Um, if you're not able to watch us live, and that's a shame because it does give you the opportunity to interact. If you're not able to watch us live, please feel free to go on Rumble, on YouTube, on my X feed at Dr. Dina 1, or you can go to Daily Clout and you can see every episode of the show. And as you saw from the initial slide, this is episode 80. So we've been at this for a little while. Now, why do I keep saying that this show is so different from every other show? It's because I'm a social psychologist. Social psychology studies power dynamics. We study the brain. We study how people learn, how we're influenced, persuaded, manipulated, coerced, indoctrinated, and brainwashed. And because we study those things, unlike the rest of my peers in my field, I actually reveal to you the tricks of the trade so you can protect yourself and your loved ones from being unfairly influenced. No other show is going to show that to you, and it really matters. You got an example of how important it is to know these things during the COVID era when we were being told one thing and the science actually said something completely opposite. People who had been trained by me, people who listened to my Unmasking the Abuser podcast, where I reveal a lot of these tactics, they were very skeptical about what we were being told. And so a lot fewer of us played along, and so a lot fewer of us suffered the damage. Now, not all the damage was physical. Financially and psychologically, I suffered enormously from resisting what I was being told, from looking deeper for the evidence. That's what I'm going to teach you how to do. And you do not have to be a genius to do this. I break it down, make it simple. That's what I've done my whole career, is translate complex concepts into feasible operational formats and programs and ideas and key concepts. Every episode ends with some solutions. So whatever problem we discuss, we always end with some viable solutions that are simple to do. Now, speaking of simple solutions and things to do, please, please, please get your copy of the Pfizer papers. This is so important because Pfizer went to court to attempt to hide the results of the studies they did on their vaccines. They wanted to hide them for 75 years. The court said no, but then they had huge amounts of data. So Dr. Naomi Wolf, Amy Kelly, and a whole team of researchers, physicians, biologists, cardiologists got together, went through the studies, and then translated it so that average people could understand what was really going on. Also, by buying your copy, going on Amazon, buying your copy of the Pfizer papers, you're supporting the work of this important network. Daily Clout brings all sorts of information to you the mainstream media tries to hide. However, we can't do it for free. We all have to survive. So by buying this book, you're supporting our work, and I hope you agree to do that. Now, today's topic is a continuation from last week. We're talking about when compassion backfires. And here you see a well drawn cartoon showing the events of last week. And we're calling it the psychology behind the immigration debate. People are looking at what happened with immigration and saying, that's a problem. And this video is based on this event.
We were born and raised in New York, and we want everyone here to stay in New York. You don't get to come from outside and then tell everyone else.
In case you didn't catch that, he was throwing a bomb. Okay, yes, that's what we were talking about last week. Oh, so we're going to go down in the trenches and really talk about it. I'm going to talk about it from different perspectives, including a little bit standing back and being a little bit more objective. I want to know what you think about all of these issues, so I'm hoping you will stay with us. Right now, we're watching two global flashpoints unfold at the same time. The takedown of El Mencho has thrown Mexico into chaos. The U.S.-Iran military tensions are escalating faster than anything we've seen in years. Here's what most people don't realize. Every time global instability spikes like this, one asset surges: gold. It happened after 9/11. It happened during the 2008 financial crisis. It happened when Russia invaded the Ukraine, and it's happening again right now. There's a new free report called The Global Crisis Playbook that lays out exactly what's going on and what it means for your retirement. It includes a step-by-step guide to moving your retirement into physical gold, tax-free, and penalty-free, plus a 7-point checklist experts say every retiree should complete before the next crisis hits. You're not going to hear this on the evening news, but if you have a 401k, an IRA, or any retirement savings, this is worth reading. Download it free at cloutgold.com or call 855-803-GOLD to get your copy mailed directly to you. That's cloutgold.com or call 855-803-GOLD. Yes, and we're back. So let's look. Last week, by the way, we talked about the empathy trap, how compassionate people have to be really careful because that compassion is attractive to manipulators and predators and other types of people in a romantic sense. I did mention then, though, it's not just romance. It's friendships, it's family relationships, it's work relationships, it's the social cause you belong to. Today, we're going to go even bigger. We're going to talk about how social causes, political groups can take advantage of people's good intentions, their kindness, their willingness to trust. They're projecting their own good hearts onto other people. We really have to be careful about this. Now, first of all, I have to preface this in case people think I'm being hard-hearted Hannah here. I'm not. Compassion can be a strength. It really is important to have compassion, to be able to sympathize, empathize, and care about people other than yourself. But if your trust is repeatedly violated, most people don't just become cautious. They often will swing towards anger, resentment, and they'll be prone towards overcorrection. So that rather than put protective mechanisms in how they operate in their choice making so they don't get taken advantage of, they just stop allowing themselves to give in any way in the capacity that caused them the problem. That's not necessarily helpful either. And we also talked about when you're looking at people who are really trusting, and who think the best of everyone. There are two types of people I've seen like that. People who are projecting their own good hearts onto the rest of the world. Think, if you've ever seen Gone with the Wind, Melanie was that type of person. She had such a good heart, and she projected her good heart onto the world. And then you have the second type, which is the virtue signalers. So what they will do, they refuse to see even evidence in front of their faces that they've been taken advantage of. They will put all their giving and compassion to a group that's trendy, that's been identified, refuse to see the bad, but everyone else, they think it's fair to bully them. That, they see themselves as loving and compassionate. I don't see that as loving and compassionate. If you're loving and compassionate, you are willing to be civil, at least civil to everyone. When you look at Walter Masterson, he's the second type because he refuses to admit that he may have made a mistake about open immigration after we have Islamic bombers actually use him for leverage to be able to throw a bomb at the anti-immigration crowd. And he joins them in criticizing, instead of saying I was wrong, he's like, I stick by what I said. But he still takes the time to make a cruel comment about the leader of that opposition group. I crossed some of it out because I don't curse, and I thought it was excessive. And as I said, he's not like Triad. When I talked about the people that refuse to see the bad, they have actually a psychological condition, a personality disorder called light triad. We're going to talk about that. Trust me, he's not one of them. He just wants to be admired by the people in his group who see him as selfless, and he takes all his negativity, nastiness, and bullying and puts it toward anyone that's not in his group or anyone who hasn't been identified as special by his group. That's not what we're talking about. The light triad includes having faith in humanity, a general belief that people are fundamentally good, with good intentions, and are worthy of trust. Sounds nice, right? The stats don't match up. Okay. Humanism, valuing the inherent dignity, worth, and uniqueness of every individual, regardless of background or status. I would argue that for the most part, treating people with basic civility is a humanistic principle. And for the most part, as long as you're also wary and recognize that some people will try to take advantage of you, this is a good way to operate. It makes the world a much nicer place to live in. And the third is Kantianism, based on Immanuel Kant's idea of treating people as ends in themselves. So you do something kind just to do it. It's the opposite of someone who does something that they see as kind as a show to get admiration from people. Or the kind of people, I mean, a lot of attractive women run into this, where a guy will be nice to you, but he expects you to have sex with him. So if you're in a crisis, he will volunteer to help you, but he expects you to also have sex with him. That is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who just genuinely will help someone. I have been the benefactor of so much of that in my life. People who have just helped me just because. I've also had to deal a lot with the other type. So you have to know that there is a difference. Being so naive to think everybody's good, and that if you keep just being good and just seeing the good in everybody, you're going to be okay. You not only put yourself at risk, you put your children at risk, your family at risk, anybody you're responsible for at risk. I'm sorry, it's nice theoretically to be this way, but in reality, you are in trouble. Now, these people do get a benefit from it. Higher life satisfaction. They have greater empathy for others. They're more compassionate. They're lovely to be around. They're open. They're generous. They tend to be less self-centered. However, they are often constantly at risk, and you're having to rescue them because they refuse to see the danger. They keep putting themselves in danger. You keep having to rescue them from the sharks. And you keep having to say, don't open that door. You know, like when you go to one of those old fashioned horror movies where the person's like, oh, we're safe now. I see this, the good place in the distance. So we're safe now. And you're like, no, don't say that. Or they'll open their door to the vampire or the demon. That's what happens with light triad people. They keep opening the door to the bad folks. In that way, they're like small children. They have to be watched very closely. They're lovely, but they have to be watched very closely because even if you teach them, as I have done, the red flags of someone who's trying to manipulate, coerce, control them, they refuse to believe it, especially if the person has a good sob story, especially if the person is able to deny without, lie without feeling self-conscious so they don't have any tells. You find yourself spending a lot of time trying to protect these people because they will not protect themselves. They believe any excuses, sob stories, deceptive self definitions. I've changed. Gosh, how many women have I had to rescue because the guy came along and said he's changed? And it was so obvious because I actually teach people how you can tell if somebody really has changed and somebody, the difference between that and somebody trying to deceive you. They just don't want to know. It's a challenge. So, what we're going to talk about today is a little different. We're going to talk about the empathy trap in public policy. So, stay with me. Let me ask you something. When a big IPO hits the market and jumps 30% in one day, who really made the money? Because after 45 years in the markets, here's the truth. By the time the opening bell rings, Wall Street insiders have already positioned. Venture funds, institutional capital, the well-connected crowd. They buy in years before the headlines while companies are still private. Then IPO day becomes a media spectacle, hype, momentum, fear of missing out. But that's not early. That's after early investors have already seen the biggest gains. For decades, access to pre-IPO growth was limited to insiders. That's beginning to change. Today, there are regulated ways for everyday investors to gain exposure before the bell, before the frenzy. If you'd like to learn how it works, go to preIPObackdoor.com. That's preIPObackdoor.com. Because when the crowd shows up, the real fortunes may already be gone. Okay, now we're going to talk about this empathy trap in public policy, and we're going to especially talk about immigration. And I'm going to have my lovely friend Melinda Richards join us. Hi, Melinda.
Hello. Oh, it's so good to be here this week.
How is Wednesday? Because, of course, it's Wednesday morning in Australia. So
yes, it is hump day here in Australia, and the rain has stopped, which is great. And yeah, I'm ready to talk about suicidal empathy of our societies in the West.
Oh, it is such a core issue for so many of us. And again, if you are watching this live, please sign in on whatever forum you are watching it, whatever platform you're watching this on, and you can ask questions and make comments as we go. Now, I know this is a very touchy topic, but we're going to try. Nothing is out of bounds on this show, but I come at it with a little bit of a different angle to help make us think. So we all know compassion is a powerful social value. We've been taught that all along. But if you are really empathetic, if you are really kind, if you are willing to give your trust before knowing the trust is earned and deserved, you can easily be exploited by manipulative individuals or systems. So you get taken advantage of. I mean, how often do we read about? I read something recently in Australia about how many people have, how much money has been lost to honey traps, people who get involved, older retirees that are kind of lonely, kids out of the house, maybe they're divorced, maybe they're widowed or widowers, and they get approached by people claiming, these with catfish, with these people claiming to want a relationship with them and just taking all their retirement money, leaving them impoverished. And that's just one example of the kind of exploitation. Because they'll have a sob story. Oh my goodness, if my brother is going to go to jail, or this is going to happen, or that is going to happen. You have to help me. And so the person said, "Oh, I have to help them," and they've just made it up. They're just stealing the money. One of the issues we have is over the past 40, I would say it's even longer than that, probably the past 60, 70 years, most Western societies have promoted self-sacrifice as the moral ideal. So if you're somebody, you're never supposed to say, why should we? Why should we welcome in huge amounts of people who don't share our language, our culture, our religion, our ideology? Why should we? You're a bad person if you ask that. You're supposed to welcome them with open arms when they come in, and once they reach critical mass, start telling you, oh, by the way, you have to change the way you do everything. You're
Absolutely.
supposed to just do it, or you're a bad person. You're never supposed to ask, how much are they costing us? And we're seeing in America, I don't know if you've been watching what's been going on with Nick Shirley and some of the independent journalists revealing the multi-trillion-dollar fraud being perpetrated by new immigrants, Somalians, Indians, Haitians, other groups being welcomed in. Supposedly everybody that's helping them is feeling sorry for them. They're setting up fake businesses and just stealing billions and billions of taxpayer dollars,
That's
living
definitely
luxury
reaching
lifestyles.
that's gone global. That's definitely reaching Australia and all over the world now. The particularly the Somalians, that business model and what they've been doing, that's been going everywhere. And I think it's deeply, deeply embarrassing for the United States, actually, because we have the same kind of fraud here. Obviously, we're on a smaller scale, but it's still there and it's still deep. And it's a deeply humiliating problem because they're laughing at us, really. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Well, I know that when I've gone, because I have my hair in braids, and I know a lot of, in Australia, it's African women who do the braids. And when I've gone to African shops, I'd say 9 out of the 10 women that are in the shop brag about how many fake welfare claims they make and how much money they have. Here I am working my buttocks off, working 7 days a week, paying my taxes, trying to be a good immigrant, working hard, contributing to the system, and they are just stealing. And they see Australians as stupid for leaving those doors open. And they think the same thing in Canada, in the United States, UK, where the West is seen as naive and silly for not protecting itself better from these programs.
Well, look, there's definitely people in Australia who make a joke about it. There's definitely, particularly Muslim men will come out. I mean, I think there's other cultures that are a little bit more, they're a bit more sly about it. But certainly there's a number of examples of videos where they'll just come out and actually laugh and make a joke about how ridiculous Australian people are because they have a welfare system that can be exploited so easily. And then they provide examples of what they're doing, multiple wives, and then they get the single wife pension, and then they get money for their children, each of their children with these multiple wives. So it's, and then they laugh about it. And that's just a very small example, obviously, of how the West is being exploited.
Well, the thing is, what we have to do, and nobody's bothered to do before now, we have to differentiate between the moral signaling, which is, oh, the people, refugees welcome people, and responsible stewardship, because what has not been emphasized is that our role, one of our primary roles, is to have something valuable to hand to our children and our grandchildren. Helping other people's noble within reason, but helping without limits, boundaries, or realism creates unintended harm. We have a responsibility to build and maintain a thriving society to pass on to future generations. And we cannot do that if we give it away. If we allow ourselves to be belittled and exploited and taken advantage of and humiliated, because our kids are going to see that. And young people, children especially, are attracted to the stronger group. So if we allow ourselves to be taken advantage of, we're seen as weak. And our children will emulate those predators rather than us. So we're handing our culture over to these people.
Yes.
What we're dealing with now, and I'm seeing this in the UK, because the UK has been cringeworthy for years. As somebody who's lived in the UK, still does business in the UK, who loves the UK, my algorithm on social media stopped showing me UK news, because I would just kind of look away and go past it because it was so painful. And
it is painful.
And then Rupert Lowe came out, and he came out swinging, and Tommy Robinson preceded him, willing to go to jail to say, no, this is not how we want to do things. And then Rupert Lowe makes a political party, and all of a sudden the quiet people start waking up. And what we have to be careful of is we don't want backlash. And I am afraid that it's going to be really hard to avoid, because when honest, compassionate people give to others, believing they're acting in good faith, and then they're betrayed, it is a really strong emotion. The sense of betrayal is deep and strong and powerful, and this is psychological. When trust is violated, people tend to react with moral anger, not just concern about safety or fairness. People get hurt from their head to their toes. And this is why we see the tendency for backlash. They react more strongly to broken trust than to the original problem itself. And it can rapidly change public opinion, which is what we see in the United States, what we're seeing in parts of Europe, what we're seeing in the UK. I don't know how Australia is handling it, because I saw a terrible massacre happen, a terrorist event happen in Australia, and the response of government was to stifle people from criticizing the group that's perpetuating the terrorism.
That's right. And what's happening here is our Prime Minister did not come out and say that it was, excuse me, an Islamic terrorist attack, even though it absolutely was 100% an Islamic terrorist attack. He's never said those words. He's even got the police talking about that in the media and spinning a narrative that about motive. Now, everybody knows, because they were very, very clear about their intentions. They didn't lie about it, and it was absolutely an Islamic terrorist attack. Since then, we also have this enormous amount of sympathy to people who are against Western culture from the leaders in this country, and that's exactly what's happened in the UK. We are following the UK footsteps in Australia, also Canada, very, very quickly and very closely. And so when you actually see what's going on in the UK, we're actually almost there ourselves in Australia. There are people in the United Kingdom that cannot say anything about certain cultures and values that compromise the Western culture and values and the way of life, lest they get arrested. And now there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people that have been arrested in the UK for speaking out on what I call really bad behaviour. And this is about grooming gangs, raping women and children, murdering people. So at the end of the day, this is the problem that we've got. And I suppose Australia is hot on the heels, and it's absolutely devastating for the people of Australia.
Well, I have to say, as you know, I love Australia. I lived there longer than any place I've lived outside of the United States. And we have Frank Brescia, one of my regulars, one of my favorites, made a comment here. Lots of predators here in New York City. We'd rather lock up toothpaste than lock up criminals. But many here don't seem to care. They'd rather virtue signal. We're seeing that a lot. Well, the good news is that, and we just had an Islamic terror attack. The bombs were duds, but our new mayor tried to blame outsiders as agitators. Well, if
that's right. Every time something happened, and certainly that's what happened. We had an Islamic terrorist attack where 15 people were slaughtered on Bondi Beach. Now, that could easily have gone the other
60
way.
were shot. Almost 60 were shot. So
yeah.
some of those people were injured, but did not.
The thing is that in New York, it was only by luck that you didn't get, if not just the same, if not a worse outcome. It was only by luck. And exactly the same thing happened in Australia as it happens in America and it happens in the UK, is that when these incidents happen, the conservative white people, right-wing people are blamed. We're actually blamed, and we were blamed. I mean, they brought out hate speech laws here, and the only people that have been targeted in Australia so far are the Conservatives.
Well, one of the challenges we have is human nature. When I talk about the light triad people and how they're a danger to themselves and others, because they're almost like, little puppies that will walk into the traffic and expect not to get hit by a car. The challenge we have is human beings aren't naturally good at maintaining a middle position where emotions are involved. So people who are not psychologically predisposed to like triadism, who are just regular people who want to trust, who grew up in a family where they had strong principles and values, and their trust is betrayed, the level of anger they feel is going to be really strong, because most of our emotions move like a pendulum. We have the idealism phase, usually when we're young and we're being indoctrinated at school, generosity, openness, and moral aspiration. And then after we go into the real world and we actually see the results of not protecting ourselves, we get disillusioned. And then we have the backlash phase. And what I'm talking about today is to try to get us to a protective phase rather than a backlash phase. Because if we have a backlash always goes too far, and then we have to start the right thing over again. We don't want to do that, but we do want to protect ourselves. And one of the things I'm up against is that we're being told self-protection is a bad thing unless you're an ethnic minority, which is one of the reasons I've been speaking up. Because as a Black woman who was born in the South of America, faced racism my whole life, I am looking at what's going on, and I think it's a travesty. I see this anti-white racism. It's horrible. It's taking us somewhere very grim. It is not a solution. And I am saying so because they can't say you're just saying that because you don't want to face up to your white privilege. I don't have any.
Well, I mean, white people are actually an ethnic minority globally, where we make up about, I think it's less than 8% of the population. So yes, we are an ethnic minority, which is really interesting. But the thing about all of this is the virtue signaling white people are the enemies of Western society. I mean, I have to ask people all the time, well, what do you think makes a successful human being? If you're successful, you don't need to virtue signal. You just go about your life being productive and helping people, being empathetic, and really creating a great environment in your own sphere of influence. That's the idea of success. If you have to go out there and virtue signal and tell the world how great you are, I feel like you sort of shouldn't have to say it. And I think that that's a lazy way of pretending to the world that you're actually empathetic when you're really not. I suppose there's a lot around virtue signaling. I absolutely despise it. And I think that that has been a very, very big cause of why Western civilization is in the purple pickle it's in. And the people that virtue signal a lot as well, I find, are bullies. So when you actually come out later and go, well, actually, there's been some pretty bad behavior.
Uh-oh. What happened? Your mic went out? Well, while we're waiting for Melinda to get her camera connected again. Step 3, when people are betrayed, they have an emotional reaction. Most of the time it's anger, resentment, or fear. And it is followed often by overcorrection. They're tempted to swing towards harsh policies or extreme positions. And what I'm saying is, I want us to swing back to the position we should have had in the first place and include in that really rigorous self-protection of our society and Western culture. And that is it's amazing how contentious that view is. One thing you see, the bigger the betrayal feels, the stronger the backlash tends to be. I'm worried about what the backlash is going to look like, because I see so many people who look like me committing crimes, getting in fights, being at the forefront of spurious lawsuits against conservatives while getting backhanders in pay and stealing money and doing things like this. And I know that this behavior it's making racism rational. And I don't want it to be rational. I'm looking at all the data they're coming out with, showing how straight white men are discriminated against so badly. And now in Virginia, it's even open, offering small business and business contracts only to minorities or protected groups. So straight white men, no matter how competent you are, no matter how deserving you are of that contract, you can't get it because you're white. That is racism. That is the worst kind of racism. And it's going to end up with a really poor outcome. Who are you going to blame then? And there's a concept. How many of you in the audience have compassion fatigue? You genuinely wanted to help other groups. You looked at Dr. Martin Luther King and you said, yes, let's get rid of this hateful racism. Let's judge people not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And you saw the anti-racism efforts that started around, I'd say, 2008-9. You saw these efforts by Dr. King and you said, I want to be somebody that ends racism and discrimination. And you get tired of seeing it turned into something so ugly and something that in return, it didn't get rid of racism. It just made it okay to discriminate against you and your family. We don't win with that.
I lost power.
I wondered what happened to you. We're talking about compassion fatigue, where people have gotten to the point where they wanted to help, they wanted to be fair, they wanted to be good people, and they're seeing their efforts being taken advantage of so badly by people who have no compunctions about exploiting that. I don't blame people for feeling that way. Frank says he's been taken advantage of many times and his efforts were never appreciated. Well, those people, you just haven't been dealing with me. I always appreciate whatever somebody does for me. So I was brought up a little bit differently.
Frank. Don't stop doing it.
Yes, please. You are still the enemy. Yes, I hate it when people are like that. You know why they called you still the enemy? They considered you that? Because they knew that as long as they had you on what the British and the Commonwealth called the back foot, as long as you were feeling self-conscious, they could still manipulate you into giving them things. And when you start feeling self-conscious, you start focusing on yourself and you take your attention away from who those other people are and whether they're actually offering value, whether they're true to their word, whether they're decent people. You're too busy figuring out, oh my goodness, I must have done something wrong. This is all manipulation. And when people are betrayed this way, several psychological shifts occur: emotional exhaustion, skepticism, and resentment. And you get people who once supported generous policies may begin advocating much stricter approaches. I would say right now, that's actually smart. Not because they stopped caring, but because they feel the system isn't working as intended. Well, actually, the system was put together to destroy Western culture, so it is working as intended. We have to decide whether we're going to let that happen. And I am saying no. But when we put this new system together, it needs to be, I love the way that Rupert keeps saying, Rupert Lowe in the UK keeps saying, you're telling me I'm biased and bad for wanting a policy where I protect Britain? I don't care what you think. Call me what you want. I'm like, yay. Perfect. You have to be calm. You have to be considered. I keep telling people over and over again, do not make a decision in an emotional state, which is one of the reasons why they put those ads out, or they put those stories, or they have somebody stand up and tell this sob story, and you feel so bad for their group. And you're like, oh, I need to give them some money. The poor things. Never make a decision in an emotional state, whether it's feeling compassionate, empathetic, feeling happy, feeling grim, feeling afraid. If you are emotional, wait till you calm down. Do not make a decision in an emotional, heightened state, positive or negative, because during that time, your frontal lobe, the part that's responsible for complex problem solving, your executive thinking, goes into passive mode. So it basically goes to sleep. And the other parts take over. Now, you can screenshot this. This isn't about, a course on the brain. But I did want to tell you, because there are 4 different areas of the prefrontal cortex, that the problem solving, executive thinking part of the brain. And it all goes into passive mode. It kind of goes to sleep when the emotions are high, and when the hippocampus, your primal brain, wakes up because you're afraid or you're angry, or you have to do something for your group alignment and group membership, then that doesn't wake up again till later. But that's the part that needs to make the decisions on things like how you're going to handle immigration policy. Because the decisions made with the prefrontal cortex are solid problem solving that will bear up under scrutiny. That other stuff won't. Now, keep in mind, if they make you afraid to get you to do something, fear distorts perception, guilt distorts perception, anger distorts perception, and idealism can distort perception too, just like we saw with Walter Masterson, where he's standing there promoting, oh, everybody's welcome. And you get a guy throwing a bomb literally over his head, jumping on his back to get leverage to be able to throw it into the crowd. Policies that are made during emotional surges often lead to regret. And what has happened is all of Western society has been manipulated for decades. They've used emotion, they've used our primal drives, like our desire to belong, our desire to be a good person. They've used that to get us to make decisions, or to allow decisions to be made without us contesting them, that are actually destroying us. So we need to know compassion versus guilt. You can be compassionate if they start to make you feel guilty, like saying you're still the enemy. Frank says it's bad enough you can have family members who try to take advantage of you. You don't need the system doing the same thing. Absolutely. Compassion is thoughtful, responsible, balanced. It creates a healthy cultural dynamics, seeks to remedy problems. Okay, so that's compassion. Guilt-driven policy is reactive, symbolic, unsustainable. It may be destructive, it's usually destructive. And it's a foot in the door tactic to serious manipulation. The foot in the door technique is one of the most successful sales techniques that any marketer knows. You would know this having worked in marketing. If you can get someone to make a small purchase or a small concession, it exponentially increases the likelihood that you can get them to make a larger purchase or a larger concession. And you can just keep going back to them and just taking. So you have to learn how to say no at the start. It's like, let me see where this could go. No. So we're going to talk about we should have a whole show on the power of no. What I advocate for, and tell me what you think, Frank, and anybody else, Roscoe, if you're here, Nettie, if you're here, cost-benefit analysis. I think everything should be done according to a strict cost-benefit analysis. What are the costs, immediate and longer term, of allowing you and or your family and or your group into my society? Because it's like adding spices to a dish. Everything you add is going to change the flavor. Is it worth it? Are the benefits of having you here worth the cost? And especially if you don't speak the language, you don't look like the people, you have rules against intermarrying. So 5 generations from now, you're still going to be separate. All of that counts. All of that is a cost. You're not educated. That's a cost. You're going to need welfare. That's a cost. You need translators. That's a cost. But even having you there where you're taking up space, you're buying up housing that my people need, that's a cost. So the benefit has to outweigh the cost. What systems ensure fairness and accountability? Often I look at the immigration system in Australia. I had to jump through so many hoops to get my permanent residency. I had to prove I was a world expert in my field. I had to get cleared by the FBI. I had to get cleared by the Australian Federal Police. And then a few years after that, they just let anybody in. These same women I talk about at the hair shop, all of them have Australian citizenship. They're not Australian in the slightest. They don't speak English well enough to be understood. Some of them don't speak English at all. They've been here 18, 19, 20 years. Still don't speak English. They eat African food. They only have African friends. They only be hanging around with other African people. They adhere to African cultural norms. They still have all the animosity, intergroup animosity they had back in Africa. And when you fill your country with these people, what are you going to have as a result? I don't know. I had an Uber driver the other day from Venezuela, and he didn't speak English at all. And I'm like,
I think, Dina, with a lot of the discussion around immigration, we sort of forget, I think, or we forget to say it, or maybe we just don't want to say it, that not every culture in the world can nest together effectively. Right. That some cultures are so different. Some religions are so different, even though I don't really like calling Islam a religion. There are such deep differences in our value system that they simply cannot live together. One must inevitably take over the other. And I don't think that anyone has ever really come out and been honest about that in our global leadership, where there are just certain groups of people that cannot cohabitate a country. And I think that that is now coming to play. But I think that there is less of a passive role now that traditional Western people with traditional Western values are starting to not only wake up now, but I think that it's surprising to many global leaders how much resistance is actually coming. And it's going to be very interesting because there's a reason why in human history we have borders. There's a reason why we have countries. There's a reason why we've that over our evolutionary period, that groups of common people have decided they want to keep whatever it is that they find special, and they put a border around it. The interesting thing, of course, is that, you know, how far do we want to go in Western civilization now to protect what we have, or are we going to let it fall? Because I think we're at a very critical stage in our history right now.
Mm-hmm. And I know this. As a military kid, moving around, and people who don't know anybody that's been in the military, unlike a neighborhood, in the military, you're assigned housing. So you're just told to live wherever there's an empty spot. So the probability is high that you don't have neighbors that look like you. There's also the factor that often when soldiers are transferred overseas, a lot of them end up marrying the women from the country that they were transferred to. Because, of course, being married to an American and coming back to the States has been of value for a long time.
Yep.
So you have all of these neighbors who don't look like you. You have all of these cultural differences, what works and what doesn't. I found that people can work together well if they look different, but not if they have different fundamental values.
Now, it's all about values. It is all about values and behaviour. I mean, no one in Australia cares about skin colour. I mean, we're not a racist country. We're one of the most successful multicultural nations in the world. Nobody cares about skin colour. I do not have one friend or associate or business partner, and I'm in my 50s. I've lived a life. I don't know anyone in Australia who is overtly racist or even covertly racist. But there are growing groups of people in Australia who are now pushing back against bad behaviour, against cultural values that are not compatible to core Christian Anglo-Saxon values. And it is about that. It's not about skin colour. And we get really, really caught up in Western civilization right now because, of course, people like me and yourself, we're attacked as being racist. And it's like, well, actually, we're not talking about race. People are confused because they use the word racism very incorrectly. Racism is absolutely not on. No one that I know of is racist. But I'll tell you now, people are very, very much against certain cultural norms that are being pushed upon us that we don't want. And that's the key issue here. And that's not what we're talking about, you know, in broad. That's why these sorts of shows are really, really important, because we've got to get to the heart of the matter.
I have to say, somebody that lived in Australia for 20 years, I did face racism sometimes. I had a neighbor, for instance, when I lived in the suburbs of Melbourne, who from the time I moved in, we had one guy who wouldn't even sell a house to us because he came out and saw me. And then when we moved somewhere else, I had a neighbor that I lived there. He lived next door to him for 7 years. And he would never even just say good morning to me. But that was so, and first of all, you find bee holes everywhere you go.
That's true. And I mean, I generalize when I talk about Australia. Of course, there's racists everywhere in the world because of course.
But I would say it was much less. It was much less. I mean, my home state's California. I'm a military kid, but I settled in California. California is known for being pretty open-minded. But even compared to California, I faced less racism in Australia, to the point that when I came back to the States, I was so open in my nonverbals that everybody just started talking to me. And I was like, what's different? I'm different because I have no expectation of rejection.
Yeah.
From living in Australia, where people like, it's basically Australians look at you, okay, who are you? What do you got? You know, you get to tell them who you are. They're not going to say you must think this way because you're. My only worry about Australia, though, is it has been critically taken over by less progressive thinking.
Yes.
And you have people who are, they've joined in the TDS, so they're so busy hating Trump and anything that Trump supporters do. They're not looking at how their own country is being fundamentally destroyed. The quality of life when I left Australia compared to when I moved to Australia was so vastly different. Because when I moved to Australia, it was Australian.
Yeah. It's being destroyed because we're now become a socialist country, but now also we are being muzzled. So we have a freedom of speech issue, we have a housing issue, we have a cultural incompatibility issue, we have enormous amounts of violence occurring, and I think that it's scary for us because we see what's happened in the UK. And I always want to say to anybody when I travel to the United States, which I do very frequently, is that you do not want to go down the path that Australia has gone down because your population has taken their eye off the ball, has been very apathetic, will not talk about politics, will not actually front up to the issues facing us, which is a deep division now that has been caused because we have a small population which is now divided because of cultural incompatibility from immigration.
Well, as I said, and because I'm a brown immigrant, when I have taxi drivers, when I'm doing my work, people are open with me in a way they would probably not be with you. And I found such patent disrespect, and most immigrants were economic immigrants.
Yes.
They not only retained their old culture, they despised Australian culture. They just moved there because they wanted a quality of life and they wanted to make money that they could send home. And it is a travesty. Australia, oh, so beautiful. I felt privileged to live there. So I had a very different experience. Most of my friends, you saw where I lived. Okay, I was the only one that looked like me in my neighborhood. I merged with the Australians. If I wanted to be on with my own, I would have stayed with my own. And I had so much respect for Australia. I went there to contribute. I always move somewhere to contribute. Just a very different experience. And I looked at these people and I'm thinking, this is the majority of what I run into. And as things harden, you're going to find out how very hostile your immigrant population is. So I said the question societies need to ask, how do we respond to abuse of the system? We have to be just so strict. We have had a problem for the last 15 years with young African males and violence and machetes and fights and gangs, which never happened before. Start deporting their whole families and that stuff will stop. Hold their whole family responsible for what they do because they're the only ones that can control them. Their only community are the only ones that can control them. How do we retain our culture? I'm glad that more Australians are saying, no, we have a culture that we admire and we want to keep. But a lot of people have been taught that they should be embarrassed to say they want to retain their culture because so many left progressive people have taught them to have suicidal empathy is actually a value. No, you do not. So let's just quickly, before we end, I want to just bring up a couple of points about preventing the overcorrection, because we don't want to get into a society where I am forced to live with people whom culturally I share nothing with because of my skin tone. I want to live around people with whom I share values.
Yeah.
So we face three main dangers: naïve idealism, ignoring the risks, seeing everything with rose-colored glasses, not considering the impact of immigrants on their economy, infrastructure, housing, education, healthcare, cultural norms, expecting new immigrants to adapt quickly and completely, considering diversity as a strength when it never has been. It's unity that binds a society, not diversity. Finding ways to flood the system. They abuse the system with new immigrants, misusing welfare, the loan system that's intended for citizens, using guilt and false claims of mistreatment to reduce their accountability. And focusing on the immediate, not understanding how immigration will fundamentally change the culture into the future. Or reactionary harshness. One person of one group does something, you punish the whole group. We don't want to go that far. But you also don't want to overlook risk. Clinging to ideals instead of facing tough facts. Some groups are fundamentally incompatible with the societies in which they move. They
That's
need to
so
be
true.
removed.
So true.
So the way forward, seek out a range of viewpoints, even the uncomfortable ones. Resist emotional manipulation. Demand evidence-based policy discussions. Stop it with a we can't look at that, or we shouldn't say that, or it's not kind, or we need to be kind, and no suicidal empathy. Here's my biggie. Everybody watching this, be willing to say no. Can I move to your country? No. Can I live here anymore? No. What about that loan I took out? I want the money back. We're seizing your property. You have to go home. You have to be just tough. Your people have to see you standing up for your people. Because right now, too often, people just back down. And remind yourself our current action or inaction is going to influence the country we leave to our children. We have to take our culture back. We've been losing it since the 60s. It's time to get it back. Now, I just wanted to briefly tell you, screenshot this. If you need my help, if you want me to work, please go on my website, ethicalstrategic.com, to see all the different things that I do. If you want to hire me to come and do some work with you, please contact my agent. And thank you, everybody. And Frank said, excellent show again. Thanks. I hope so. Melinda, I love it when you're here. I love it.
Thank you so much for having me again. Beautifully summed up this afternoon. Beautifully summed up at the end there. Fantastic. And I really apologize for my power outage. I wasn't briefed that we'd lost our whole second floor power in my office. So that was a bit of a, I once again apologize to everyone for that, but absolutely fantastic in terms of you always bring the topics to the table and talk about them with sense, with logic, and with all of the extreme emotion taken out. And I wish that, you know, we need to have a lot more of these discussions at a societal level. We just must. So thank you for everything that you do on this.
And anyone, if you're watching this live or you're watching this recorded, go on X. The easiest way to contact me is go to my page on X at Dr. Dina 1 and write a question, ask me a question, talk about a topic that you want us to discuss. If you want to come on the show and talk about something, we'd love to have you. So Melinda, I will see you again soon. Thank you so much, and have a great afternoon. And see you next Tuesday, everyone. Remember, come to Heart and Mind. No more boring Tuesdays. We got an applause in the back for the doggy.
And Molly's saying goodbye as well.
Bye, Molly.